Hi everyone, welcome to the Communication and Conflict YouTube channel promoting mindful communication and growth through conflict, and this is also available as a podcast on the Chaos channel, CAOS. So today I'm kind of spontaneously wanting to do a video about the idea of psychological safety at work, which is something that has been prompted by seeing a LinkedIn post about the idea and a kind of an encouragement for that to be an important thing to consider in organisations in the coming year in 2022 as a kind of a new direction and new thing to consider. Well, not new as an idea because the idea has been around for quite a long time, but a new thing to kind of drive forward with. And for me, it really does sound great. So the title of this video, as you will have seen, is Psychological Safety at Work. Sounds like a great idea, but... and then some questions for Amy Edmondson and others. And Amy Edmondson is the person who's kind of formulated this as a concept for kind of implementation within organisations as a way that allows for kind of creativity and openness to acknowledging mistakes and various other things that I'll probably mention as I go through, but as an idea. But she's very much the person who kind of represents this as a concept, and obviously various other people have now started to write and explore the idea further. But the reason that I'm particularly kind of interested in it is manyfold, I guess, but also because so much of what she describes reflects the thinking and the practices of mediation and conflict coaching, or certainly in line with the chaos model of mediation and conflict coaching, which is underpinned by some principles of communication, which again are very much reflected in some of the things that she describes as being practices that support psychological safety at work, the experience of it. But at the same time, I do have some kind of questions because another thing that Amy Edmondson has mentioned being interested in the past is something that I was also interested in. So I'm kind of experiencing a lot of kind of similarities in background. It is the idea of a learning organisation, and I did an MA on learning organisations, not an MA on them, but a dissertation about them when I did an MA. And unfortunately, as a concept, even though it's a fantastic concept, it is one of these many concepts and ideas which have kind of faded in the past. And while it still exists as an idea for organisations and how they can kind of continually grow and develop, it is certainly one that's kind of fallen by the wayside as an idea, perhaps over the last 20 years or so. And my concern, I guess, is that the idea of psychological safety could go the same way. And my reasons for that is because I'm seeing many similarities between psychological safety as a concept and various other things that I've seen in the past, various other ideas that have come in as, going to improve things in organisations, things are going to become much better, that for me always get stuck at the kind of level of jargon. They get stuck at the level of saying, we must all do this, leaders must do this, and then there'll be these kind of concepts which are put forward for what they're supposed to do, but then realising that very few people, if any, are that clear about what the concept actually means. It just kind of sounds like a great idea. So I'm going to go through some of the things that I've seen and heard, both comments but also videos of Amy Edmondson in particular, but one or two other people speaking about it. And as I say, as an idea, I think it's fantastic, but the thing that I think is missing, there are a lot of gaps, are in the actual implementation of it, and various things and ideas that are put forward that for me suggest that it's just one of these things we're going to say, oh, leaders should do it, and if they don't do it, they're rubbish leaders, and it's basically down to leaders to sort this out, to put this in place, which, as I say, I'll go into why I have sort of concerns about that. So, as I say, first of all, so much of what is described as practices that support psychological safety fit with the thinking of mediation and conflict coaching, because both of those practices could be practices that very much could be described in the same way as supporting psychological safety at work, which is permission for candour. Because, one of the most important things in mediation is that people feel able to express their concerns, because otherwise there's not going to be a resolution of the difficulties they're experiencing. So that being one definite kind of similarity to the thinking behind both concepts. So some of the things that I'm concerned about, and that I've seen happen with other concepts in the past, and I'm kind of a little concerned that it might be the same now, is that there can often be kind of great anecdotes for examples where psychological safety has been suggested to have occurred, and kind of features of particular leaders who've done things. So Amy has mentioned times when the particular individual has really emphasized that they expect there to be problems, rather than be seen to be thinking that it's only good when there are no problems and all the processes and productivities and projects are going fine. They're people who've actually said, so what are the problems at the moment? What are the difficulties? Come to the meetings with your difficulties. Let's talk about them. Let's learn from them. Let's move on. And great, where that's the case. But at the same time, they're anecdotes. So therefore, they're going to be one-offs in places. And I'm sometimes a little concerned that you might have an anecdote about could even still be a large team, and it could be within a large organisation, but does it mean that that ethos spreads to the whole of the organisation? And if not, I'm not saying that means it's a rubbish idea. What I mean is, what can enable that approach to be spread to the rest of the organisation? What are the reasons why that doesn't necessarily happen? And also, it risks that meaning that there's a dependence on that particular leader being in place in order for psychological safety to occur. And that's obviously not sustainable, because that person might leave, they might die, they might move on to another organisation, they might retire. So it's not sustainable if it's all about just one individual. It's got to be about an ethos spreading across the organisation. So how is that supported as a thing to happen? This is kind of one of the questions that I've got for anybody out there who's watching. I'm inviting questions from anybody, answers and responses and thoughts from anybody about this. It's just that these are the kinds of questions I'm asking about what can enable that to happen. And I have a kind of a bit of a concern about this idea that so often it's portrayed that it's leaders who have to, I think the phrase is, create psychological safety in an organisation. Because for me, there's actually almost a counter, that's almost self-contradictory, it seems to me, because if everybody's relying on the leader creating psychological safety, then it suggests that they don't really play much part, and it's all down to the leader, which then means there's a dependence on the leader to provide it, rather than for people to learn how to provide it for themselves. And obviously that can grow within a supportive environment, but much of what I'm reading is saying leaders have got to be empathetic and have an intention to listen, or is kind of a description I've seen. And again, can't disagree with that, but why is it only leaders that are identified as needing to do that? Why not everybody? And then it means it doesn't become kind of just dumped on a leader as an expectation, and therefore very unlikely to go ahead. Because within that, there's also the fact that how many leaders have within their job description that they're responsible for creating an environment of psychological safety at work. Very, very, very few, I would say. Almost no people who are in positions of leadership are likely to have that within their job description. So again, why would it be seen as their responsibility and almost only their responsibility? So these are questions. So I'm, this is a thing. I'm interested in answers. So if people have got answers to these things, please put them forward. But I'm not clear why it isn't everybody's responsibility rather than just leaders, and that people can work with leaders, because then it makes it less of a parent-child kind of relationship and more of a peer-to-peer or adult-to-adult relationship that's existing in the workplace. But often we place enormous dependence on leaders without recognising that actually they might not be able to carry that for everybody. And then beyond that as well, you might have an inspirational leader in a team or a department, but what if the policies that are in place that surround the activities of any team within a large organisation or any organisation, what if the policies don't themselves support psychological safety? Because as some of you will have seen when I had a discussion with Melanie Guyver recently about workplace disputes, so often most policies that relate to behaviour in organisations are more about discipline, punishment, dealing with people who are, questioning things and challenging things. And so in a sense, if that's the main format of the policies within an organisation, that's not going to support permission for candour. People are going to feel constantly that they can't challenge things because they may be at risk of disciplinaries if the leader that they're challenging isn't able to explore an issue, but instead is very defensive about it and feeling very threatened by somebody questioning their decisions, etc. So the thing that I'm looking for more examples of, and it's not as if I haven't heard Amy Edmondson mention or alludes to certain things, but I think they need to be much clearer and much more specific, are what are the actual interactive skills of a leader or anyone that supports psychological safety at work. What I have heard Amy Edmondson mention have all been things which I would say mediators, or certainly mediators who practice according to the kind of model that the chaos model reflects, those skills and those interactions are the kinds of things that, as I say, are reflected in mediation practice. So if I give you some examples, just one of our principles of practice, of communication practice and interaction, is that it's okay to make mistakes because they're opportunities for learning. So in mediation, you can probably imagine that one of the things we're trying to support people in doing is looking at what they've done in order to decide whether there might be a better way of doing things in the future. So they may have reacted to someone in a dispute at work in a way that they may decide, or between them, they may decide could have been done differently. So it's an opportunity for learning. So it's recognising it as a mistake rather than a thing for one or the other to be punished for. But again, as I mentioned, the discussion I had with Melanie Guyver in our recent discussion was that most responses to difficulties at work is proving and punishing rather than learning and moving forward. So they're past focused rather than learning and moving forward based on mistakes that have happened. But Amy talks about Amy Edmondson talks about leaders who have encouraged mistakes or even failure in order to see work as a learning problem rather than an execution problem. So she phrases that as one of the ways in which psychological safety can be kind of implemented in an organisation. So to frame the work that's being done as a learning problem rather than an execution problem. So that therefore means that you can constantly revisit it and look at things that aren't working and improve them, rather than think, right, we've got to final stage now we can just execute it, we can just carry on doing what we're doing without any reflection on whether things are fully working as well as they could do. And what's then expected is that everybody turns up every week and says, yep, everything's fine, it's all going well, etc., rather than saying, no, as expected, there are a few challenges this week. These are the challenges. What can we do to improve them? Another thing that she mentions that again is very much reflected in mediation practices is that she spoke about where a leader might feel they're creating an environment of psychological safety at work, and they may do so by saying, I'd really like to hear what your concerns are, how things are going, what are the problems, what things do we need to address, and they may say that up front, but then when they get a response, what they then do is go on and fill most of the airtime available by talking themselves and giving answers and giving opinions. So their initial invitation might sound like they're wanting to create a place of psychological safety, but then they don't really go on and listen. And we have a principle in mediation, which is that we support the idea of people speaking, but not too often or for too long. And the basis for that principle is that it allows space for everybody to contribute rather than just one person to, like in schools, sometimes kids are always encouraged to keep sticking their hand up to say, I know the answer, I know the answer, I know the answer. And it just means that it's just one kid all the time who's speaking. And that can also happen in meetings sometimes. But also when someone does speak, do they speak for too long? So therefore, this leader may have asked for information about what's not going well, but then they think they've got to give a long and arduous answer rather than continue to listen and to continue to ask questions, which is the next thing that Amy also refers to leaders who might, in a meeting, not say something like, does everyone agree, or does anyone have a different view, which is a closed question to which the answer is either yes or no. And you've got to say no before you even get a chance to go on and say more about what your concerns might be. So it's so much harder to express your concerns, whereas an open question, which again is a common mediation practice to invite depth of discussion about things. She mentioned somebody who in meetings used to say, who has a different view, or what other views are there, or what are people's thoughts on this, so that it's openly acknowledging that there will be other perspectives rather than just saying yes or no, do you, which is a more restrictive question to ask. And again, these are all kind of mediation type practices, but what I'm not seeing in a lot of the videos is this kind of greater detail of what actually constitutes psychological safety at work, what supports it being possible, what are the things that need to be done in terms of people's interactions, what are the policies that need to change in order for it to be encouraged throughout the organisation. I'm just hearing, yes, we must provide psychological safety, yes, we must give permission for candour, but and also, as I say, the assumption that all leaders have these capacities, even though it's not in their job descriptions. So my questions are really about, all of it, great idea, sounds fantastic, but how do people actually do it? What training do people have in the skills necessary? What policy changes need to happen to support it? Because, as I say, most policies with regard to challenges of viewpoints in organisations are punitive policies. They're adversarial processes, so they don't support open debate about things. So these are my questions. Where are people managing to overcome these challenges, or are people simply writing into their policies in organisations, this year we're going to implement a psychological safety policy, and that's it? It's left at that, and maybe in time we'll start to get kite marks for psychological safety, and we'll get accreditations like we used to have with things like, sorry to pick this one out, but investors in people and things like that, and it then just becomes a kind of an abstract concept instead of an actual daily, everyone involved practice with an understanding of what it is and why it's happening and how it's better for people to be working in those environments, because I think so much it can just become an abstract idea. Yeah, so I'm going to leave it there because I've raised some questions. My invitation is for anybody to have expressed their viewpoints, to give their answers. If they've got further questions themselves, please put them in the comments section below or get in touch with me to raise them, and I can raise them in other forums where the discussion point comes up. I think psychological safety as a concept, because it's such a great idea, but at the same time, for me, at risk of just becoming just staying at that as being a great idea. But I think it's likely that I'm going to be having further discussions, quite possibly with Melanie, who I spoke to recently about workplace conflict, but also hopefully in various other things. I'm probably going to try to create some other videos about it and podcasts about it, because I think it is a very useful concept to explore, and particularly because it has so many similarities with what the point of mediation and conflict coaching is, and effective communication and consideration of how we express ourselves and mindfulness about that, and growth through conflict, which is, as you know, the very point of these videos, to promote mindful communication and growth through conflict. So that's me leaving it there. Hope you found it interesting and useful. If you've got comments, please put them below. If you've got questions, please do so, or get directly in touch with me. Have a good day. Bye bye.